find yourself a comfortable position tonight. Not because this is a gentle story. It isn't. But because what we are about to explore deserves your full attention, your stillness, and perhaps a little of your mercy. Tonight we pull back the gilded curtain of the Palace of Versailles. We step past the Hall of Mirrors, past 10,000 candles and the scent of powdered wigs and hothouse roses, past the laughter that was always just slightly too loud to be genuine, and we find her. A girl. Just a girl, really. 14 years old, standing at the border between Austria and France, being stripped of every single thing she had ever owned. Her clothes, her jewellery, her dog, even her name. She had been born Maria Antonia Josefa Johanna. By the time she crossed that border, she was Marie Antoinette. By the time history was finished with her, she would be something else entirely. A symbol so powerful, so endlessly debated, that even now, 2.5 centuries later, we cannot agree on what she actually was. Was she a frivolous child who fiddled while France starved? Or was she a prisoner so thoroughly trapped by birth and circumstance that the word choice barely applied to her life at all? Let us find out. The year is 1770. The place is a small island in the middle of the Rhine River, a stretch of no man's land that exists precisely for moments like this one. On one side of that island, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, the world of Empress Maria Theresa, the most powerful woman in Europe, who had spent 15 years producing children for the precise purpose of placing them on the chessboard of European politics. Maria Antonia was her youngest daughter, her most beautiful pawn, and she'd been packaged and dispatched to France with the efficiency of a diplomat sending a very expensive letter. On the other side of the island, France, the Bourbon dynasty, the most glittering, most indebted, most combustible kingdom in Europe, which needed an Austrian alliance the way a drowning man needs a rope. And there, in a specially constructed wooden pavilion in the middle of the river, the exchange took place. Marie Antoinette had to remove every stitch of Austrian clothing, every piece of Habsburg jewellery. Every familiar thing she'd ever touched was taken away and handed back to the Austrian delegation. She was dressed again from scratch, in French silk, French lace, French perfume, as though she were a doll being repackaged for a different market. We do not know exactly what she felt in that wooden pavilion. History does not record the expression on her 14-year-old face as her Austrian ladies-in-waiting wept and embraced her for the last time. History does not tell us whether she cried or whether she was simply too well trained in the art of royal composure to show it. What we do know is this: she was alone, completely, structurally, institutionally alone. She had no allies in France, no friends, not even a familiar servant. Those had been dismissed at the border too. She would be surrounded from that moment forward by strangers who were also competitors, by courtiers who smiled at her face while calculating her weaknesses, by a foreign language she spoke imperfectly, in a country where even the way she laughed would be scrutinized and reported back to her mother in Vienna. She arrived in Versailles to cheering crowds, to fountains and fireworks, and a 16-year-old boy named Louis Auguste, the Dauphin of France, who would one day be Louis XVI. She looked at him. He looked at her. He shook her hand, and then he went to bed. To understand Marie Antoinette, you must first understand Versailles. Versailles is one of the most spectacular buildings ever constructed by human hands. It is also one of the most deliberately, systematically cruel. Louis XIV, the Sun King, the great-grandfather of Marie Antoinette's husband, had built it not merely as a palace, but as a machine for controlling the French aristocracy. His genius, if you can call it that, was to take the most dangerous people in France, the dukes, the princes, the great nobles who might otherwise be building private armies and plotting revolutions in their provincial estates, and bring them all to Versailles. And then he made them compete for the privilege of handing him his shirt in the morning, compete for the right to stand in a particular spot during Mass, compete for invitations to particular suppers, particular hunts, particular card games. The entire social hierarchy of France was compressed into the square footage of one palace, and every inch of that space was governed by rules so complex, so arbitrary, and so ruthlessly enforced that a single misstep, wearing the wrong colour, failing to bow at the right angle, sitting before you were invited to sit, could destroy a reputation that had taken generations to build. This was the world Marie Antoinette walked into at 14. A world where getting dressed in the morning was a public ceremony involving a dozen ladies of different ranks who had to hand her each garment in a specific order. A world where she could not eat a meal alone, could not walk through a corridor without an audience, could not sneeze without someone recording it. A world where her body, what it weighed, what it wore, whether it had produced an heir, was not her own property but state property. Subject to discussion at the highest levels of government, she was expected to be perfect, to be gracious and charming and immovable, to smile at people she hated, to defer to women who despised her, to navigate a court filled with factions and spies and people who'd been waiting for years for a new Dauphine they could manipulate. She was 14. What did she do? She did what 14-year-olds do when they're terrified and lonely and have no genuine friends and unlimited access to money. She spent, she played, she ran. She threw herself into fashion with a ferocity that went far beyond mere vanity. Her hairdresser, a genius named Léonard Autier, built structures on her head that defied gravity and occasionally caught fire from chandeliers. Her dressmaker, Rose Bertin, became one of the most powerful women in France simply by virtue of having access to the Queen's ear and her purse. Marie Antoinette spent on clothes the way other people spent on cathedrals, with religious devotion, with the absolute conviction that beauty was its own justification. She gambled. She danced at masked balls until 4 a.m. She built herself a small fantasy farm on the grounds of Versailles, the Petit Trianon and its accompanying hamlet, where she could play at being a simple shepherdess, where the sheep were washed and perfumed before she arrived, where the mud was removed from the paths, where poverty was aestheticized and made exquisite and utterly divorced from the real poverty that was growing, like a cancer, across the rest of France. Was she cruel? No. Was she stupid? Not exactly. She was something perhaps more dangerous than either. She was profoundly, catastrophically unaware. She did not understand what was happening outside the gates of Versailles. Or rather, and this is the more heartbreaking possibility, she understood it only abstractly, the way you might understand that somewhere in the world it is raining while you stand in a sunlit room. We cannot understand Marie Antoinette without understanding her marriage, and to understand her marriage, we must set aside everything we think we know about romantic love and speak honestly about what royal marriage in the 18th century actually was. It was a diplomatic instrument, nothing more, nothing less. Louis Auguste became Louis XVI of France in 1774, when his grandfather Louis XV died of smallpox. He was 19 years old. He was shy, deeply introverted, more comfortable in his locksmith's workshop, his private hobby, that odd mechanical passion, than in any ballroom or throne room. He was not handsome. He was not charming. He was, by the brutal standards of Versailles, entirely unremarkable. But he was the king, and the king's marriage had not been consummated. For 7 years after their wedding, Louis and Marie Antoinette did not produce an heir. This was not a private matter. This was a national crisis, a diplomatic emergency, a source of poisonous gossip that spread from Versailles to every court in Europe. Pamphlets, vicious, anonymous, sometimes pornographic pamphlets, circulated through Paris questioning everything from the king's masculinity to the queen's fidelity. They called her Madame Deficit. They called her the Austrian whore. They called her l'Autrichienne, the Austrian woman, a phrase that slid so naturally into l'Autrichienne, the other bitch, that you have to wonder if the cruelty was always intentional. What was the truth of their marriage? The truth, as best as historians can reconstruct it, is complicated and strangely tender. Louis was not indifferent to Marie Antoinette. His diaries show a man who was genuinely fond of her, who worried about her, who eventually came to love her in his careful, introverted way. The problem was medical, possibly a correctable physical issue, possibly rooted in the almost comic inadequacy of both their educations in matters of intimacy. It was eventually resolved, reportedly after an intervention from Marie Antoinette's brother, Emperor Joseph II, who visited Versailles in 1777 and had an extremely frank conversation with Louis that history has mercifully not transcribed in full. The following year, Marie Antoinette was pregnant. She would go on to have 4 children. 2 would survive her. But here is the thing about those 7 years of a childless marriage in the most gossiped about palace in the world. They broke something in Marie Antoinette, something that never fully healed. She had been sent to France to do one thing, to produce heirs, to cement the alliance, to be the vessel through which the next generation of Bourbons would arrive. And for 7 years, she had failed at the only task anyone had ever assigned her. So she spent instead. She danced instead. She built her fantasy farm and ordered another diamond necklace, and stayed at the gaming tables until the candles burned down to nothing. Because what else was there? What else was permitted? What else was she? There is a story, the story really, the one that sealed her fate in the public imagination, that begins in 1785 with a necklace. It was the most expensive piece of jewellery ever assembled in France. A cascade of 647 diamonds, weighing nearly 3,000 carats, originally commissioned for Louis XV's mistress, Madame du Barry, a commission that was overtaken by Louis XV's death before the necklace could be delivered. The jewellers, desperate to recoup their investment, offered it to Marie Antoinette. She refused. Even she, at her most extravagant, recognized that the price, 1.5 million livres, was indefensible. And yet, somehow, impossibly, her name became attached to it. A con artist named Jeanne de la Motte had constructed an elaborate fraud. She had convinced a desperate, gullible cardinal named Rohan, who had fallen from Marie Antoinette's favour and was willing to do almost anything to restore it, that the Queen secretly wanted the necklace and would pay for it in installments. She had forged the Queen's signature. She had even hired a woman to impersonate the Queen at a midnight meeting in the garden of Versailles. The jewellers handed over the necklace. Jeanne de la Motte dismantled it and sold the diamonds. The installments never arrived. The fraud unravelled, and the entire sordid story exploded across France in a scandal that consumed the court, the courts of law, and the coffee houses of Paris in equal measure. Here is the remarkable thing. Marie Antoinette was entirely innocent. The investigation proved it. The cardinal was acquitted. Jeanne de la Motte was convicted and imprisoned. Every piece of evidence pointed to the same conclusion. The Queen had nothing to do with this. It did not matter. The damage was done. Not because people believed she had ordered the necklace, but because people believed she could have. Because the story felt true, even when it wasn't. Because Madame Deficit, this woman who had spent the treasury on dresses while French peasants starved, was exactly the kind of person who would secretly acquire a necklace that cost more than most Frenchmen would earn in 100 lifetimes. The diamond necklace affair was the moment Marie Antoinette lost the French people, not because of what she had done, but because of who they believed her to be, and who they believed her to be. That was something she had spent 15 years teaching them. The late 1780s arrived with the slow, grinding inevitability of a glacier. France was bankrupt. The harvests had failed. The price of bread, basic bread, the bread that kept people alive, had risen to the point where a family might spend 80% of their income on it. People were not merely hungry. They were the kind of hungry that turns quiet and purposeful and begins to look for someone to blame. In 1789, the French Revolution began. We use that phrase, the French Revolution began, as though it were a simple event, a switch being flipped. It was not. It was a long, building, unstoppable dissolution of everything that had seemed permanent. It was pamphlets and speeches and bread riots, and a national assembly that refused to be dismissed, and a king who could not decide whether to fight or to accommodate, and a queen who was watching the floor beneath her feet turn to ice. Marie Antoinette, in these years, underwent a transformation that history has not always been willing to acknowledge. She grew up. The girl who had gambled away the nights and commissioned towering hairdos and retreated into her fantasy world at the Petit Trianon. That girl began, slowly and painfully, to become something more serious. She began to understand, perhaps for the first time, the true weight of what she was. She threw herself into politics with an urgency born of terror, writing desperate letters to her brother Joseph, then to Leopold after Joseph died, begging for intervention. She worked to negotiate with the moderate revolutionary factions. She argued, and sometimes pled, with Louis to take more decisive action, to escape, to consolidate his support. She was, in these years, more politically active than she had ever been, and more completely powerless than she had ever been. In June of 1791, the royal family attempted to flee. The escape, meticulously planned, desperately hoped for, failed at a town called Varennes, where a postal official recognized the king's face from a coin. They were brought back to Paris under guard in silence, through crowds that lined the road but did not cheer. The law had declared that anyone who cheered for the king would be beaten. The silence was worse than any insult. Marie Antoinette, sitting in that carriage on the road back to Paris, must have understood something then that she perhaps had not fully understood before. There was no escape. In August of 1792, the Tuileries Palace was stormed. The royal family fled to the Legislative Assembly, where they sat in a box above the chamber floor. Not as monarchs, not as prisoners exactly, but as something in between, something the French language had no word for yet, while the world outside burned. They were taken to the temple, not the ancient Knights Templar fortress in its medieval glory, but its medieval tower, a grim, tall structure that had been converted into a prison. Louis, Marie Antoinette, their two children, Louis Charles, 7 years old, and Marie-Thérèse, 13, and the king's sister, Madame Elizabeth. All of them compressed into a handful of rooms, under permanent guard with shrinking freedoms and growing terror. This is the Marie Antoinette that history tends to skip over, the one in the temple, because she does not fit easily into either of the roles we've assigned her. She is not the frivolous queen spending the nation's money, but she is not yet the tragic martyr ascending the scaffold with serene grace. She is something more difficult and more human than both, She is a mother. Her daughter's accounts, Marie-Thérèse, who survived the revolution and lived to old age, who eventually wrote about what she had witnessed, describe a woman who poured everything she had left into protecting her children, who managed the rigid, humiliating routine of prison life with whatever dignity she could muster, who gave her son lessons, tried to maintain some structure in the shapeless horror of their confinement, who wrote letters she knew might never arrive to people she was not sure still cared. In January of 1793, Louis XVI was guillotined. Marie Antoinette was told by the sound of the crowd. She'd not been allowed to see him in his final hours. Their last meeting had been a brief supervised farewell the evening before, and then he was gone. She's said to have wept. There are accounts that suggest she could not stop shaking for hours afterward. Whatever their marriage had been, diplomatic instrument, practical arrangement, awkward friendship, something that had grown, slowly and quietly, into something more, it was over. And with it, the last meaningful structure of her world. She was now the widow Capet, not even a queen, not even a name, just a number in a revolutionary ledger. Then came the worst thing. In July of 1793, her son, Louis Charles, 8 years old, the child she called her chou d'amour, her little cabbage, in the private language of mothers, was taken from her. He was taken to be raised by a cobbler named Simon in a cell beneath hers, and the terms of his re-education were as brutal as they were systematic. The revolutionary government intended to deroyalize him, to make him denounce his parents, to make him forget who he was and become instead a revolutionary child, a mascot of the new order. She could hear him through the floor, crying at first, then, as weeks passed, laughing at jokes she couldn't hear, with voices she couldn't identify, and that was in some ways worse than the crying. She paced the cell above him. She pressed her eye to every crack she could find in the floorboards. The guards eventually covered the cracks. She would never see him again. He died in the temple 2 years later at age 10 of illness and neglect. She never knew this. What do you do with this fact? How do you fit it into any narrative, whether the narrative of just punishment or the narrative of tragic martyrdom? A child, 8 years old, taken from his mother by the state. Whatever one thinks of Marie Antoinette, however one tallies the accounts of her spending and her blindness and her political failures, this remains. She was moved to the Conciergerie in August of 1793. This was the last stop. Everyone who went to the Conciergerie knew what it meant. Her trial lasted 2 days. 2 days to wrap up the life of a woman who'd been Queen of France for 19 years. The charges were extraordinary in their sweep and their viciousness. She was accused of conspiring with foreign powers. Plausible, actually, given her letters to Austria. She was accused of depleting the treasury. Debatable, given that the financial crisis predated her and would have unfolded with or without her. She was accused of royalist plotting, and then, at 2 a.m. of the second day, a man named Haber added a charge so monstrous that even hardened revolutionary prosecutors seemed momentarily stunned. He accused her of sexually abusing her son. The accusation had been extracted from little Louis Charles, who had been coached, some would say forced, into making a statement under circumstances that no court in any century would consider valid. The child was 8 years old, isolated, terrified, and entirely dependent on the goodwill of his captors. Marie Antoinette did not immediately respond. The courtroom waited. Then she raised her head and said something that has resonated across centuries, not because it was clever or calculated, but because it was the most naked thing she ever said in public. She appealed to every mother in the room. She said that nature itself recoiled from such a charge, and that no mother could respond to it. The spectators murmured. Some of the women in the galleries wept. The prosecutor had made a mistake. He had overreached, and in overreaching, he had briefly made Marie Antoinette human again, in the eyes of people who had spent years thinking of her as a symbol of everything wrong with the old world. It was not enough to save her. Nothing could have saved her, but it was something. She was convicted in the early hours of the morning. She was given a few hours to write a final letter to her sister-in-law, Madame Elisabeth, the king's sister, the one person still living whom she genuinely loved. The letter was never delivered. It was confiscated and discovered only decades later. In it, she wrote about her children. She asked Elizabeth to be a mother to them. She asked her son to forgive, if he could, everyone who had caused them suffering. She said she had no enemies in her heart. She expressed the hope that she was dying as her husband had, with courage and with faith. Whether she believed all of it, or whether she was writing the letter she knew she ought to write, is impossible to say. On the morning of October 16th, 1793, her hair was cut short and her hands were bound behind her back. She was loaded onto an open cart, not the closed carriage that had carried her husband to the scaffold, but an open cart deliberately chosen for maximum exposure, maximum visibility, maximum humiliation. She is paraded through the streets of Paris for over an hour. The crowds were enormous. People climbed onto windowsills and rooftops. They shouted. Some threw things. Others simply stared. What did she feel? We do not know. We have accounts of her expression, composed by most reports. Pale, moving her lips slightly as though praying or speaking to someone only she could hear. At the scaffold, she stepped on the executioner's foot by accident. She turned and apologized. She said she had not done it on purpose. Then she walked up the steps of the scaffold and it was over. She was 37 years old. Here's the question history cannot stop asking. What was she? The revolutionaries had their answer. A symbol of parasitic aristocracy, of a system so rotten it consumed its own people, of foreign influence and domestic corruption, and a monarchy that had simply lived too long and cost too much. The royalists had their answer. A martyr, a wife, a mother, a queen destroyed by mob rule and revolutionary savagery. The feminists have their answer. A woman whose entire existence was determined by her gender, whose body was state property from birth, whose political powerlessness was structural, and who was punished with extraordinary cruelty for sins that were at least as much the system's as they were hers. All of these are true. None of them is sufficient. What strikes you, if you spend enough time with the actual record of her life, is not her frivolity. It is her loneliness. She was profoundly, chronically, architecturally alone. She was taken from her family at 14 and never went home. She was surrounded every day of her life by people who wanted something from her. Political access, social advancement, a scandal to sell, an alliance to cement, and almost no one who simply wanted to know her. The money, the dresses, the diamonds, the gambling, the masked balls, these were not the behavior of someone who did not care. They were the behavior of someone who cared too much and had been given nothing legitimate to care about. Someone who had been handed a role so rigid and so public and so stripped of genuine human connection that the only freedom left was the freedom to consume. She was not innocent. The spending was real, the political blindness was real, the Petit Trianon and its perfumed sheep while the real sheep farmers of France starved was real. She did not understand her country. She did not, for most of her queenship, try hard enough to understand it. But there is a difference between guilt and responsibility, and there is a difference between what a person is and what a system makes of them. Marie Antoinette was made by a system, the system of absolute monarchy, of diplomatic marriage, of Versailles and its 1,000 rules, that treated human beings as instruments of power. She was its product before she was its beneficiary. She was its first victim before she became, in the eyes of France, its symbol. She never understood her fate, not because she was stupid, but because the people who were supposed to teach her, her mother, the court, the kingdom, never told her the truth. They told her she was precious. They told her she was chosen. They dressed her in silk and powdered her hair and told her the world was designed for her comfort. No one told her the world was on fire. No one told her the fire was already at the gates. By the time she understood it, in the temple, on the cart, at the scaffold, understanding was all she had left, and she carried it, in the end, with more dignity than the world that destroyed her perhaps deserved. Tonight, before you close your eyes, perhaps spare a thought not for the Queen, but for the 14-year-old girl on that island in the Rhine, handing over her dog, putting on someone else's dress, stepping into a life that was never going to be hers. She never had a chance to understand. That, more than anything else, is the tragedy. Sleep well,